Welcome to Choose a Track Podcast.
Okay, first thing I want to ask you, Carlotta, is am I pronouncing your second name correctly when I say Mastrojanni?
Yeah, it's kind of a silent J, Mastrojanni.
Mastrojanni. Carlotta Mastrojanni. And where's that name come from? What's the heritage of that name?
I'm Italian.
Oh, wow.
I grew up in England, so I have a British accent, but I'm Italian.
And you're in California as we speak?
Yeah, Ohio, next to LA.
And how long have you been there?
5 or 6 years now.
Okay. And you grew up in the UK in London?
In the UK in North London, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
spent most of my life there, yeah.
So how did you, what was the journey to California then? How did you end up there?
I met my husband in New York.
Okay.
And we moved over. And then, pretty much moved over straight away and stayed. Yeah, have been here since.
Wow. That's wonderful. So the reason and firstly, thank you so much for your time as well today. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I came across you as the modern medicine woman via my wife, who is a doula here in the UK. And she would often lean over and show me images and writings of yours. And so you've inspired her and I'm sure many, many others, which is why I'd like to talk to you today. In a time as well when obviously the world is in a really difficult place and energy, I guess, is kind of upside down in many ways. And a difficult time. But I wanted to just ask you about your journey, how you ended up being so tuned in with your energy and feeling energy around you, and how you sort of navigated towards that as a lifestyle and a choice to share that.
Okay. Shall I jump in?
Yeah, go.
Well, I guess I've always been really interested in the unseen realms and in magic in a way. I grew up with magic. My grandmother on my father's side was a bit of a mystic, a Christian mystic. So there was always a lot of prayer and just a lot of talking about angels in the house. And on my mother's side, my grandmother, my great-grandmother were very much into these kind of traditional forms of magic, but they didn't really talk so much about it because it was not seen very well in the 50s in Italy. So it wasn't really something that we were encouraged to work with. And if anything, my grandmother would try and shut me down if I was being too open, or even like dancing or singing. It wasn't ladylike to behave that way. So there was a kind of constriction of this feminine essence, this sort of sense of being able to see through, the 3D realm to other dimensions, and this sense of, empowerment and this goddess-like creation, as some people call it. It was really something that was considered something to be put away. So that was very sad. And I grew up very numb, and for lots of different reasons, like childhood wounding and like different things. So by the time I was in my 20s, I was really shut down, very disconnected from life force energy and numbed out. And then it was actually a Kundalini class in Rome that I took, over 10, 15 years ago now. And that sort of shook me up again. And I realized, oh, wow, I actually do feel something, in my body. And I do sense that there's this supernatural world really out there that's just like knocking on my window. So I started to just get into practices that would allow me to work with this life force energy. Kundalini Yoga and Tantra, and then, of course, shamanic practices that brought me back to my own ancestral traditions of magic. And so, yeah, I just fell in love with our potential as human beings, our multidimensional potential. And from that place, I started to study humans. I would work with people and just learn from them, and just started to see things and understand how people's energy was moving. And so that became something I wanted to share, because I just really wanted everyone to feel that sense of aliveness that's being lost, and also be okay with waking up. So many people right now are really awakening, and they might need a little bit of support, with what they're feeling, because it can feel a little bit strange,
overwhelming. So,
yeah, I'm just there to support people in their process.
So when you were growing up, and you mentioned, maybe your expression in dance even, or just that was kind of a little bit suppressed. What was it like? What were your mum and dad? What was the situation with your mum and dad? Were they kind of sort of together in love, and was it a sort of a nourishing family environment that you grew up in? What was the situation with them, and how were they with you?
It was nourishing in many ways, because they were together and they loved each other very much. My father's passed away, so I say loved, but we still speak to him, of course. But I think it was really, the goddess was stifled in our home in so many ways. So my father just grew up such a staunch Catholic that for him, Catholicism, or the way we worked with the unseen realms, had to be very specific, and it was very patriarchal in so many ways. So there wasn't so much this talk of Mother Mary or the Magdalene. Forget about the Magdalene. This whole idea of sacred sexuality, or the idea of the feminine being equal to the masculine. That just wasn't really spoken about. It's just quite constricted. And then my mother, bless her, is very masculine in many ways. And so she's nourishing in the sense that she's very, very present and gets things sorted, and, DIY woman, definitely. And that taught me to be in my masculine. But I didn't really have much guidance when it came to the feminine.
Right, that's interesting. That is interesting. And how has your mother taken to your sort of flourishing into what it is you've become in your journey? Has she been supportive? Have you affected her in any way? Have you sort of given feminine to that masculine?
I'm not sure. She's very supportive.
That's lovely.
I think that she inside she's very supportive, and she gets what I'm doing. But I think that she's still turned off to the idea of fully expressing that feminine magic. It's scary to her, which is interesting, because I think when we feel very scared by these things, there's really something ancestral there, and it's some connection to our own inner power that is missing.
And do you feel like through the generations that there's something has helped to change that as we progress, as we evolve? Are we more accepting as we move through the generations of accepting this? Like you say, it feels to me in my life, when I speak to certainly my granddad, and there was a much more kind of rigid, set out structure of where we are in this sort of positioning as human beings. We know our place, and feelings kind of are suppressed, that we may or may not experience. So do you feel like, as the generations, we're making it easier for us to sort of express ourselves in that way at all? Do you think?
So yes, I think so. I think that there is a huge opening towards both masculine and feminine energies and understanding that they're within us, first of all. So I see a lot of men are more open in their hearts, are more ready to talk about their feelings, even though it's still very hard. That's why men's groups are so important. And they're catching up, they're also, men have also been vilified with the rise of feminism and this, rise and coming back to matriarchy and that sort of thing, and the importance of the feminine. So we also have to support men at this time, so that they're also not crushed by this, this huge feminine awakening, as it were. And the women are understanding how they've become more masculine over the years to survive in the man's world, and how it's okay for them to come back to their feminine. But we're all balancing both of those things in our lives. And I think we're starting to talk about that a lot more.
The communication being the key, really allow, you mentioned males talking to one another, and something that's happened on my podcast, even though we're in our infancy, is that we're finding guys coming on, and the topics of the time that I think are, more and more social media and cultural tidal wave of keeping up with one another, and the amount of data and the different imagery that we're seeing all day. And guys have sat in here and we've talked about it, and it's come up, and guys have let themselves really discuss how they feel and opened up. And it's been really powerful for me to be sat across, because it really does pull out those feelings in you that sometimes you might think, oh, it's okay, I'm a guy and I'm doing what I'm doing, and but when you hear it from another guy, you think, wow, yeah, there's something. And then the floodgates can open, and this release is really, really, really helpful and cathartic, I'm finding.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so beautiful when men get together and share, and they'll do it you'll do it in your own way. It's very different to how women come together. Women have this ancient need to circle up, and men don't have that in the same way. But finding ways to connect is still really important.
And knowing that we're all one another vulnerable and experiencing pain and hurt and wonder and confusion and all of these things. My wife, as I mentioned, introduced me to your work, and she's a doula, and she has members of her family, great grandmother, who in the UK here, they're from Cumbria, and they have a history of kind of a white witch, if you like, kind of magic that comes through. And my wife certainly got something in her like that, and she's brought out so much in me, without, not by design, just by love, just by being together, and me sort of softening and allowing myself to just be in the moment, and learning so much about things like birthing and things like breastfeeding and things like natural birth, and sort of treating it as a wonderful gifting moment, as opposed to a sort of something to be worried about or be anxious about. And I've learned so much from her in that way. And that's another thing that I'm really keen to know. You talk, the womb clearing, womb cleansing and things like that. Is that specific to the mindset of being pregnant, or is that your being fundamentally? What is your sort of position there?
I love to think of this womb space as something that is fundamental to being human, and it's present in both women and men in many ways. If you like, it's your higher space, and it's your sacral. Women certainly store a lot there, and of course, because we give life from there, it has so much more meaning for us. But it's an energetic space, and when you're giving birth, the womb space becomes wide open, and of course, it's a huge jump for a woman. That's why it's such a particular time in our lives, and where we need women as your wife to guide us through that time. But there's other ways that you can look at the womb and clear the womb. It's not just about fertility and pregnancy, but it's about coming back to a vital life force energy that lives in the womb. And sometimes that can get squashed by things from your present day, a sense of hurt or betrayal or situations and patterns that you've been holding on to. But it can also go back to your ancestral lineage, particularly your maternal lineage. It can even go back to your past lives. I mean, I kind of think of it as a trap door that you open and you go in to meet your soul and your soul's blueprint and your soul's journey there. So it can get pretty wild in there.
So how do you go about treating that, fixing that, guiding that, and healing it? How is that process brought about?
There's a lot of holding and attention and love. Just as you were saying, I loved what you said about how your wife and you connect. You know, just even it doesn't have to be a big show or learning or teaching. It's the presence and the love that you bring to it. And then just getting more and more aware of the subtle energies as they're moving through your body. That's one way in. Like, I like to start from the body and growing the sensation in the body, so that you can stay connected to your body, to your womb space, to your heart, and feel when something doesn't feel right. And we always say, I have a gut feeling.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Which is true for everyone. And what if we were to say, especially for women, it's like, yeah, I can feel it in my womb. That's another way. It's a way that we navigate the world. But it needs a certain amount of awareness and ability to recognize subtle energies as they move. But I've also seen people access their womb space just through simple meditations where they put the intention there to see, to discover, and it does open things up.
Yeah, the intention really strong. And you mentioned sort of that gut feeling, the gut biome, and I've read some science in the last couple of years and listened to some really interesting podcasts where, scientists are kind of aligning that instinct there as powerfully as we might think of ourselves as having our minds in our brains or behind our eyes in some way. But actually this instinct in the gut that we need to trust more because it tends to be right is so powerful. And actually there's neurons and there's all sorts of brain activity that's happening there, which takes me to things like nutrition. And obviously, as you talk about these subtle energies and how to kind of feel the body again, how important is things like nutrition? How important is it that our bodies in the modern world, we're sort of battling against the tidal wave of fast food and throwaway food and chemically, synthetic sort of non-nutritious foods that our body are functioning on? Is that something that, you work on, or is it something that is in any way critical? Does it matter? Or is this, I'm interested to find the other facets of how does this become sort of whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, supplements are huge. I mean, especially when you're pregnant and you're giving life. But they're obviously important, that what you put in your body, the life force energy that you put in your body is huge. It's very important to how you're able to move the energy through your system. If you have a lot of density around your gut area, maybe your gut isn't functioning optimally, all your energy will go there. You'll be spending most of your energy just trying to digest, literally, like physically and energetically, what is happening in your body, rather than being able to move your life force energy or Kundalini energy, whatever you want to call it, up. And you know, there's a lot of emphasis on energy moving up towards the higher power centers. I believe it's also coming back down, as you were saying. There's now we're really starting to see through our guts and see through our wombs, and there's less emphasis now on the third eye and the mind. At least, you know, they're working more together. So yeah, there's the, I suppose you could call it the physical realm is important, like working with herbs and plants, and the energy of the physical realm. And that supports the clearing of the womb of things that you can't touch and see, and you know, things that are a little bit more ethereal.
Yeah, it's fascinating because we live in times where I think it feels, certainly anyway, that that physical realm that we're in, which is turning into a digital kind of code imagery. You know, I often describe it as it's almost like we have a small hard drive in our system somewhere that can take so much data and can process at a certain speed. And I feel like we're so exposed now to so much imagery, so much code, so many ideas, so many incidents of news, whether that be sinister or otherwise, and levels of anxiety, levels of depression, levels of just somehow trying to cope seems like it's, I mean, at an all-time high as far as I can experience firsthand in the world that I'm in with the younger people around, you know, Generation Z, these guys that don't know a world that's any different than other than sort of scrolling and flicking and all this imagery and all these ideas. So are you seeing that at all? Is that something you're aware of? Is that something that you feel and see in your work? Is it something that you can measure even?
Yes. I think that our nervous systems are being completely shocked by everything that's happening. Things are moving so fast. There's just no barriers up anymore. There's no boundaries up there. And so our nervous systems are getting frazzled. And so all the more reason to be really connected to your gut, to your womb, to really have that as your center of gravity. And to clear as much as you can so that you can keep centering yourself in yourself and walk through the world in that way. And I am, particularly interested in teenagers and that generation that has got so much, they're being bombarded, as you said. And for me, the idea of them getting better boundaries and a better sense of who they are through knowing themselves better in any way they can, I think that's paramount. It's so important so that, you know, they can not lose themselves essentially in all this that's going on.
How does it feel at the moment then, Carlotta, in the States? Because I try my very best to not participate in any kind of mainstream news or kind of narrative of the world. And I sort of gather my information via podcasts and, you know, papers I might read or lectures I might listen to and so on. And a lot of the stuff that I'm listening to that comes from America at the moment, and in California in particular, it feels like a lot of unrest, feels like a lot of, as you say, rapid change, both in the physical realm of, like, you know, industry and on the streets and with the people, in the atmosphere, in what we might perceive to be one of two futures at the moment, which look like, you know, things could go either way. It certainly feels from here in the UK, as I look across at America personally, that things are really on the edge and the energy must be really difficult. And the pending election, it doesn't look like, whichever way that goes, it doesn't look like it's going to be much fun. How's it feeling over there at the moment? And how is it for you with your sort of astute energy and, you know, trying to sort of find some sanity, I would call it even?
Yeah. It feels very daunting. There's a lot of questioning of truth and what the truth is, as you know. And so to me, again, the only way back is to know what your truth is, your personal truth is. And I'm seeing a split, or what could end up being a split. This time that has been prophesized of the split between dark and light. Not to get all Star Wars or Jedi, but sense of things have gone so dark in one direction that some of us just have no choice but to make extreme choices in the other way that we wouldn't necessarily have done, but we're being pushed. It's like, well, if things are so bad, then I'm really going to have to start growing my own food. And then I'm really not going to be able to send my son to school. And things that I wouldn't necessarily have, been felt so intensely about. But it feels like America's the epicenter for something, for all things being uncovered.
Yeah, I agree. And what was your opinions of America before you moved there? And had you travelled there prior? And what was those thoughts prior to actually the experience of being there? How was that for you?
Well, I never had anything against America. I always thought that it sounded like an exciting place. I'd never been to New York before. And when I finally got there at 36, I thought it was amazing. And now I loved it. And, there is this sense of freedom here, I have to say, ironically right now, but when I first came, the fact that I could even make a living doing what I'm doing, or that I could find communities here. I mean, we have a beautiful community here in Ojai, which is a spiritual community, and even those people who aren't involved in spirituality, they're involved in permaculture, and other different things. So there's just it's a space that's really beautifully held. It's a little bit utopian in a way, because we all have our space, so we're not quite living on top of each other in community, but there is a sense that we live in the same town and we work together, sort of thing, to make things better. So in so many ways, I have so many opportunities here that, for example, in Europe were tougher for me. Yeah. In Italy, especially, there, and one of my aims is to bring this work back to Italy and the Italian generation that's growing up now, because it's been so, the Vatican has been so influential there, and the church and these older systems that no one talks about this old magic that we have in these olden European traditions. So in a sense, there was enormous freedom for me here and opportunities. So that sense of the land of hope and freedom was still going. And at the same time, it can be a very dark place. And now it's showing. And unfortunately, I think the majority of people here, and I feel very privileged to live the way I live, and there's no way I can deny that. And then, but seeing what's been happening with the Black Lives Matter movement and the whole relationship that they have here to the land is so different.
Yeah, it certainly feels from here. I mean, as well with the kind of censorship that seems to be happening, the freedom of speech, we're constantly offending one another. Every other comment is offending somebody, and then, as you say, that severe pushback does result in otherwise severe response that wouldn't necessarily occur, because we find ourselves in this strange sort of locked in position of that. No, it just feels mad. I mean, one of the scenarios that's really interesting to me as well is the whole trans movement, and the way that's sort of making its way here as well in the UK, and the confusion around where we stand with it. And I think there's been a couple of quite pivotal books written in the last year or two that kind of showcase instances where cases, young children in America who have had operations and so on at a very young age have now gotten to sort of their early 20s, and there's a sense of regret and how did this happen, and the speed that that's moving in is it does feel really a confusing time. And with you talking strongly about, you know, the feminine energy and, you know, the patriarchy, and that seems to collide in that space in a really strange way. How's that playing out over there for you? Is that?
So another thing I love about being here, that there's that there are certain areas where they seem to be a little bit ahead of the curve, as well as areas where they're totally behind what's happening. I think, sorry, but
Yeah.
And so there's a whole movement. I don't know that much about the trans movement, but I know that there's so many people here who are coming out and saying that they're non-gender or non-binary. And so I love that, you know, that there's a whole wave of people who are coming out, and children who are coming up and saying that they don't want to identify with being masculine or feminine. And I think that in a way, this is part of our future, really accepting that we are moving towards, through our polarities, towards more union in so many ways. But it just tends to be so, again, that kind of tends to be something that's becomes contentious, you know, that people are either really actively defending, or, you know, that people are obsessed about it being wrong, or and so there's still so much polarization about all of this new energy that's coming in, which is a more unified energy. And I don't think that means that we then have to start pointing the finger at those people who are like, well, I'm very masculine or I'm very feminine. As you say, everyone is pointing the finger at each other, and it doesn't matter, you know, what it's about really anymore. It feels like people are sort of looking for something to get behind.
It certainly feels that way. Like we are manifesting through this connection that I spoke of earlier, this kind of, we're so interlinked and taking on so many ideas and so many narratives from in every different direction. It's almost like we are manifesting a new breed of ourselves, you know, whether that be physically, mentally, emotionally. It's almost as if we are kind of, we're morphing in a way, it feels like. And it makes sense because, you know, we keep moving through time, don't we? And our evolution is to make things, whether that be in an industrious way, you know, more productivity, or, you know, we're becoming so streamlined, and the speed is phenomenal.
We are. We're evolving so fast, faster than ever. And the children who are coming in are just so awake. And that's why I think some of them so confidently present as, no, I am this new thing that doesn't have a label, that doesn't want a label, and they want to be respected and honored in this way. But we're still in a time where there's a huge shockwave around everything. So, and, you know, some of these waves are starting here in America, but hopefully they will also be the beginning of some change. More understanding amongst ourselves.
So with your work, Carlotta, so when you're sort of working with clients and each individual person you work with, you're sensing different energy, different background, different traumas, different cases of energy that you're sort of tuning to. Does that take energy from you? Do you ever feel fatigued from that? Is it something that sort of draws? Do you ever find yourself in a situation that's a difficult energy to deal with?
I have to be careful when I work with people. So I think it's always good practice to protect one's energy. So I always make sure that it's a very safe space that we're working in, and that I protect the space, as it were. But I find myself being very much a channel. So I do channel things in my body, and I do channel a lot But yes, I can, feel what other people are feeling in my body. And sometimes it can be intense, not always. But I just have my systems, to just kind of flush it out of my own system. And I find that I'm just acting as a channel in that moment. If an energy gets stuck in me, it means there's probably something in me that I have to work on.
That's interesting.
That energy. So I just try and be very aware of that.
It must be really so liberating though, and powerful when you see somebody sort of connect with themselves and find layers of themselves that they as you say had forgotten about, hadn't realized they had that strength, that empowerment. That must be really, really powerful for you.
That's my favorite thing. Yeah, my favorite thing is when people get to really tune into their own particular life force energy, because we all have our own unique essence. And it's like a particular flavor or frequency, whatever it is. It can feel like, the ocean or like the desert or whatever it is. It's sometimes changeable, but people have like a signature, what I like to call like a soul blueprint. And when you have a felt sense of that in your body, you don't forget it. Again, there's just something about dimensionalizing it. So feeling it in your body, not just seeing it, but really knowing it, and plugging back into that feeling of what being you feels like. What are the qualities of your life force energy? And I think that's always the aha moment for everyone, and what I love for people to go home with.
Yeah, of course. And then I guess that permeates out into their lives, and that ripple effect moves through all of their communication and their elevation of their elevation of their aura, I guess.
Yes, exactly. Because when you really feel your medicine, what we can call your medicine, for lack of a better word, then you just push that out. Yeah, wherever you go, that's just what you lead with. And then you begin to get a sense of when you're slightly knocked off balance, which can happen. So you bring yourself back. And just when you shine from that light that's turned on from the inside out, you can't go wrong.
And the truth that you talked of earlier, that seems to be, that is where it resides, that truth, that sort of willingness to look at yourself square on, own yourself, know yourself, faults and scars and everything that you wear is who you are. It's what you do. Your intention is to just be open, I guess. And I found I suppose in the ways that my wife sort of opened me up a little bit and allowed me to drop that guard I mentioned earlier and sort of allow myself to be a bit, the liberation, the kind of prison, the boxed in feeling of trying to fit into culture or fit into certain groups within the culture. Something about accepting myself as being fallible and trusting that I'm going to make mistakes. I will be knocked off balance, as you've said, but continuing to try and, I don't know, for me, I've tried to simplify it by, I'm just trying to turn things into positives as best I can, and whether that's something that is difficult to deal with initially, somewhere I'm learning all the time and applying it better, is taking the lessons from things, myself predominantly, trying to watch myself a little bit, sort of zoom out a bit and think, how have I dealt with a certain situation, or what was my perspective, and how have I had bias in that, and what was, and it's really something at the moment I'm struggling with the current climate, where we are with certainly in the UK, legislations and things that are happening every day now that are sort of being mentioned in the press, in tabloids and things like that, but we're not given a full picture, and there's all sorts of things that are really, really quite scary happening. And I've sort of looked into some things in the last couple of days, and I'm trying to sort of gather myself and center myself and find my balance and not get taken in, into those polarizing ends that you mentioned, and I'm finding it quite difficult at the moment. The last couple of weeks, I've found it really quite difficult. And in the work that I've done, I've been on a I would say a really kind of nutritious and happy run for a couple of years, where I've felt like I have faced myself, grown somewhat. I've become a father and bringing up my children and just finding magic in these simple moments. And in a way, kind of naively building my own little bubble within this bigger bubble, this world. And then in the last couple of weeks, I've really sort of had a look into, right, where are we and what is actually happening? And it's really given me a judder and a shudder, and I'm a little bit wobbly at the moment. And it's the first time where I guess I'm able to apply these tools that I've gathered over the last couple of years and actually kind of observe myself a little bit. And my wife's sort of helping me, but I haven't felt this way for a long time, and certainly not since I've managed to sort of shape myself a little better from the inside out. So it's difficult. I mean, how does somebody like you cope with, the tuning that you've got, and then the frequencies that are trying to break into your sort of life? You must look at your son and your husband going out into the world, and how is this affecting us all, and how can we try and stay in some kind of center?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I really hear you. These have been really hard times for everyone. I think it's doing a number on everyone, and we're feeling the whole world. There's a destabilization happening on a global level. So it is intense. I like to come back to the idea of working with my inner fire. There is a sense that if I push things away and try and ascend out of the situation or ignore the situation, of course it isn't going to completely help anyone. Sometimes it's okay to protect yourself to a certain extent. But I think it's so important for us to grow that bandwidth so that we can hold everything. And I like to say, in a way, include it in our energy field, burn it in our fire, so that we can just keep stepping out into the world. The solution is not going to be trying to purify ourselves of everything completely and avoid the situation, but to just grow stronger in who we are, in our light, in our fire, in that knowing, so that we can include everything and sort of alchemize it. It's a process of alchemy here.
I like that. Yeah.
That's, going back to the nervous system. It's about just having that breadth and that width and being able to stay through it. But it doesn't mean that we have to join the dark forces or, I think it'll just keep bringing us back to our own authentic way of living. But if something does come up that doesn't work, we'll have the energy to confront it, or the energy to really figure out what's going on for ourselves. And, because we are going to need a bit of energy to get through this time and not be defeated.
My wife has been saying to me in the last couple of weeks, is there somewhere, and it's ironic because you just mentioned the community that you're privileged to live in, where there's a feeling of everyone's together, and there's a kind of a holistic kind of subconscious mindset, if you like, where people feel like, we're all kind of good intention, trying to stay connected to meaningful physical being and life and ecosystems. And my wife's been saying to me the last couple of weeks, when I have actually voiced this to her, and she's kind of centering me, and she's saying, well, is there some, we could go somewhere, we could do something if this country is going to go in a particular direction. And I'm kind of like, but what about, where do you get, have you experienced, Carlotta, coming out of your community, have you gone somewhere where you've had to go into the town, into the city of LA, and felt have you been able to think, wow, we are in a really lucky spot, and actually, whoa, it's like almost getting behind the curtain of the real world in many ways when we talk of, potential utopias?
Yeah, it happens all the time. I'm always thinking, that maybe I'm kind of a nomad, and I'm always thinking maybe I want to go somewhere else. But then every time I step out, I'm like, I don't know. It's not that easy out there. But I do think one thing that's becoming increasingly important for me is to go back to my ancestral land, is the importance of that. I think partly what's happening, there is this sort of backlash of this global situation and this global pandemic and global destabilization. And if people could then tune into their own roots and what's really important to them, I think it's about digging deeper into where we are. And I'm trying to dig deeper now into this town that I'm in, rather than wanting to escape, which is a thing for me also, because I've lived in different places, and I'm always like, okay, what else can I do?
Yeah.
But about learning to stay, and how can I serve this place where I am now? And then beyond that, where is my home? Where are my ancestral lands? And I'm just feeling such a thirst for that. And if we all went back to our lands and all practiced what our ancestors knew, it would be amazing,
wouldn't it? I've been kind of, I guess, practicing that in a very simple sense, that during the lockdown here in the UK, and during this time where which I've seen as a blessing, and I've tried to extract positives, as far as my direct experience has gone. I've got 3 young children, 6, 5 and 3, being at home with them, being there all the time, going for walks, just having a lovely, lovely time, and being immersed in family time, and knowing that this is unprecedented, really, to be able to be here all day, every day with them for this amount of time. It's been fantastic. But what we did start doing was we started to go wild camping. So we were going out just with minimum kit, bags on the back, enough water, some shelter, some food, and just going off into the woods or into the Lake District or into the Peak District. And I started that at the beginning of the lockdown on my own with a friend, and then did a solo camp later on, but then started to take the family as well. And we found it to be almost like unplugging everything, literally, as a metaphor, and just going out into the land, into the endless undulations of just the beautiful nature of the UK, which is beautiful. It is a beautiful place. And we've just watched the children running around in the woods, just playing with sticks, creating things, making things. We've been making a fire and just eating simple food that just tastes better than anything you'll ever eat, because you just, when you're eating some lovely food on a beautiful mountaintop or hilltop, watching the sunset, and you've got just enough water, and you've just got your shelter that will just protect you from, the potential of rain or whatever it may be. And it is a sense of freedom, but it's a sense of deep connection as well. It's been a real therapy for us, I find, especially now being able to kind of look back across these last few months. And as I say, the last couple of weeks in particular, where I've started to actually sort of be penetrated by the darker, sort of lower frequencies of what is actually happening. Yeah, it's been a real godsend that we found that, and that my wife happens to really enjoy it, and the kids love it. So that's, I guess, in a way, that's a simple sort of rooting, if you like, or earthing.
Yeah, that's such a blessing. It's such a blessing. And we can all do it. We can all find our little, patch of earth, our camping ground, whatever we can, go and ask your grandmothers and grandfathers for more information, what they might remember, looking at the elders and the children. And this is really beautiful. We can build that wherever we are. It doesn't have to look crazy,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does the future hold for the modern medicine woman then, in the way of practice? And I know that you wrote and released a book. Was it in 2018?
I think it Yes, yes. Was it 2017 or 18? Yeah.
And how did you find that process of writing like that? And
it was fun. It was essentially, I just collected over the years so much information from working with people, from my own experiences and learning, and it just came into a system for healing. And so I was pregnant at the time when I just finished it. I thought, I've got to get this out there before my son is born. And so I did. And it's just this little primer, as they call it here in the States, like a manual for the first awakening of this inner life force energy and healing the womb and heart and birthing from a clear space. So that's sort of the foundation. But it's since grown so much because we are evolving, as we were saying, so much that new things have come in so fast. And I've found that I've moved away from working with just women to working with men as well, because I just can't ignore the, the other part of who we are.
Yeah,
and so that's been a really interesting development that I love. So I've opened up this online space for men and women to come together and connect. And
that's wonderful. And you finished the book. You wanted to finish the book before your son was born. So
yes.
How was pregnancy for you? What was your birthing experience like? And how was it? My wife will be desperate to know.
Oh, it's bless her. It was interesting. It was my absolute encounter with the dark goddess and with death.
Wow.
So it was completely different to what I had imagined. It was a huge wake up call, and really was wonderful in the end, of course, for everything that it taught me. But my pregnancy was very easy, and I was able to stay very open in the pregnancy and connected to my body, and I was lucky. I didn't even have any nausea. It was really easy. And then I ended up having something like a 50+ hour labor with a stalled labor, and then had to be rushed off to the hospital in the nearby town. And lots of different things happened that were very dramatic, that I won't necessarily go into all of them.
Mm-hmm.
It ended up in an emergency C-section, where I almost lost my life, essentially. And it was an incredible moment, because I had to totally surrender to everything masculine, to in the system, in a way, the medical support team, the 2 doctors. And it was, if I had any resistance to the masculine before that point, I think I completely alchemized it.
Right.
Because it was so beautiful, actually, having to surrender to that, and to really know that they were there to protect me and to save my life. And they really supported me to still feel empowered throughout this very intense experience. And so I healed a lot of stuff with the masculine.
Yeah. That's what a wonderful way of looking at that as well, and taking that in, and having that kind of humility and just an understanding that not to be terrorized, even, because that must have been a very, very difficult and dark situation for you. Had you begun at home then, Carlotta? Had you begun birthing at home?
I started with the home birth, and I just, without intentionally doing this, I think I was trying to make a stand for the feminine ways of doing things. Birth at home, I don't need anyone's help, lots of things. This is going to be natural. And I think I was still carrying a little bit of anger around the system, and I was, trying to prove something in some ways. So that's why it was very meaningful for me. And that's on one level. And then on another level, I had some naivety around the beauty of birth just being how can I express this? It's like, yes, birth is so natural to us women. It's going to be a breeze, or it's going to be wonderful and magical and da da da. Well, actually, the other side of the goddess is death, is the void, is facing all of that part of being human too. And when I really faced it straight on, I realized that was something I had to integrate. That goddess isn't just beauty and these Venusian ideals of feminine energy and feminine essence. The goddess sometimes brings death and destruction.
Wow. And how did your husband cope during this time? And how sort of, is he of this mindset? I imagine he must be, tuned and kind of on your frequency as well. So he must have felt a lot of that energy.
Yeah, it was very intense for him, for sure. I think, men are so important in the birth process. They really are. And being there to be, in some ways, the protector and, just holding the container so that the woman can just fully let go and give birth. So men have a really important role in birth. And in my husband's case, that was taken away from him completely. So then having to deal with not being in control of anything, not being able to even hold that container because he wasn't allowed in the operating theater, or sort of having to listen to me from a distance, but not being able to be in the room.
Yeah, I had a similar situation with my second son. My second son was born in Thailand in a military hospital, and we had a language barrier. Obviously, we had a little bit of Thai, and they had a little bit of English. And my wife, so it was our second child, and he came quickly. So by the time I'd pulled up in the car park and sort of and my wife and her mother sort of got her into the hospital, I literally managed to get parked, got in, and when I got to the door, I had a Thai doctor who said I couldn't come in. I could see through the glass. I could see my wife. I could see everything happening, but we couldn't kind of exchange. And it's obviously quite high tempo because, as you've said, my wife had pointed out to me at the first birth, how important it was that I'm there, and I knew that she'd want me there and the energy there. But what we were misconstruing was that in the Buddhist sort of culture of Thailand, the male being in the room, and there was all these sort of respectful cues that I was missing. And in the melee of it all, we were kind of going back and forth. And then the doctor kind of said to me, well, it's your son was born 9 minutes ago. So this whole time that we were sort of going back and I could see my wife, it turns out that he had been born, and it all happened so quickly. And I just needed to get to my wife because I knew she'd want to see my face, and I got to her, and that was wonderful. And then she wanted to get him onto her breast, which she did. And there was a little bit of confusion in there at the time as well. And again, the language barrier, and the guys, I remember the nurses sort of coming around us and saying, you have to be quick, a lot of gesticulation. And we were like, well, hang on a minute, because she wants him to suckle and just sort of get, bonded on the breast. And they kept pointing up at the air conditioning, and where we were, obviously we're from England and we're not used to air conditioning. They were saying like the baby's being, we need to get into a different room where the temperature is not, so it was really quite crazy. And he was a big baby, 9 pounds 10. And my wife's whole lineage is big. He was our second baby, and he was about a pound heavier than our first. So we kind of knew that was likely the case. But again, in Thailand, their babies are much smaller by sort of average birth. So he was a bit of an anomaly, and they thought that he had maybe blood sugar level issues. And so he was taken off and put in an incubator somewhere. And then we could only see him through a perspex kind of room window, and we couldn't get the communication going. It was really difficult to kind of understand one another. And for 6 hours, we had to kind of just wait, and we didn't know. We felt confident in our instincts that he was fine, and we sort of understood that there might be confusion here because he's big and he's kind of smashed all of their centiles of what, is what they're looking for. And luckily that was the case. And eventually, we picked him back up 6 hours later. But my wife, I remember watching my wife in that moment, and I could sense that she was distraught. Her mother bond, she's powerfully connected to that side of herself. And I could sense that she was really digging deep to kind of stay in some kind of space of strength and understanding. But she was, when he was given back to her, that like I saw her kind of, there was like a metamorphosis of I don't know, like some kind of otherworldly strength thing happening. And I was like, wow, she's so strong, really so strong. But that's pales into insignificance in a situation like that you're in, where, lives are literally on the line. That must have been so difficult to overcome.
It's important to look at where trauma happens in birth. There are a lot of, little places where they can happen, and then it gets lodged in our systems, and we have to revisit them even years later, because they can be affecting us. So I've done as much as I could whilst supporting other women through traumas that have come up with them in and around birth. But I always like to think that at the end of the day, birth just is a miracle in whatever way that it happens. And we can get really stuck on that, it wasn't perfect. And I'm afraid for that time that I wasn't with my son. Yeah, I can fully understand that I wasn't with my son for many hours as well. He was with his father, luckily. But I think some souls come in, and we have to remember it's their birth plan too. It's whatever they need to come into this world. And sometimes it's our learning, and the child isn't affected at all. So it's not always like a one size fits all scenario in terms of what's happening with our soul dynamics, as it were. No, it's a mystery. It's a big mystery, and it's perfect as it is. And as long as there's unconditional love in the room, then that's really all that matters.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And luckily for me, I came across, when my first son was in utero, I came across Gabor Mate. Do you know of Gabor Mate's work? And he talked a lot about, the environment affecting baby in utero at all times: music, stress levels, nutrition. Just the if mother is in a safe and happy place, with a good frequency. And you mentioned yourself there about, the importance of the role of the father at birth. I'm not so sure that that's widely understood or known even. I think certainly here in the UK, it feels like a lot of dads feel like a bit of a spare part, like they can't do anything, like, what can I do? I just a punch bag for 5 hours or whatever it may be. But actually being there and being there in that presence, in your energy, that's something, again, luckily I learned from my wife and managed to sort of shed whatever my preconceptions were or my cultural sort of indoctrination was. And I'm so pleased about that. But I'm interested to hear your point of view on that, because I'm not sure that many men do understand this or know this and are empowered by it.
No, it's so important. Yeah, so important. And of course, the system doesn't really support you to understand it either. And it's important that men's awareness is raised, and that they can feel the strength to say, I'm going to be in the room, or this is how things are going to be. Essentially, as women, to really let go and surrender, we really need someone to hold the masculine essence. And so the man needs to be there, of course, first and foremost, because the child will recognize the father's voice, and so feeling that presence there. But also because when a woman is kind of in labor land and isn't fully present and is surrendered to the creative flow, or in absolute agony, You have to be there to be her eyes and ears and support and energetically hold the container. By that I mean to hold the space, so that she can trust enough to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's not, in some cultures, as you say, men birthing is a woman's thing and men are not included. And but I don't think, yes, it's true of some indigenous cultures. So perhaps there is no absolute way, but in the societies that we were brought up in and the way we relate now as couples, I think it's important.
And do you know have you studied at all or looked into the difference between fathers who are consciously present at birth and who are there to share sort of skin to skin and all the oxytocin exchange and all of those things, comparatively to fathers who aren't? And is there any science, is there any research to show how that bond may or may not develop over time? Is there anything?
I don't know if there's any research on it. I would say that the books that I've read that are around natural birthing do talk a lot about that sort of thing. I'm sure there's some research.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Yeah, I'd like to look at that. Because again, as I come back to your work, that when you're with your clients, the people you work with, and you're sort of somehow escorting them inside themselves to be present in their energy, to have intent, to be, to feel, that I think is so important in everything we do, in the relationships we conduct, in recognizing how we're affecting people around us. And certainly when I look around in my own history, even, my parents unfortunately were separated when I was sort of 7 years old. And again, as children, we're not necessarily so aware of what is happening in that moment. It's confusing. And, before you know it, you may be going to this house at the weekends, but, you can't really condense it and program anything. It's just happening. But as you go through life, certainly for me, looking back at it, I can start to connect dots and say, oh, wow, that had an effect. And just the sheer presence, just as I mentioned, when I'm in lockdown, just knowing that I've been here every day, not because we're going off on some crazy adventure or we're going to get a new trampoline or anything, just being there. Daddy's just here when I woke up, and he was playing the piano when I was doing my homework before school, or, just those things that you can't even quantify, really. I'm really, that's something that's fascinating me at the moment with my own journey, with my own family, my siblings, and we've got quite a big family. And as I say, because we were broken down quite early, I feel like there's so many patterns that I've read in certain books, psychology books, that I can kind of see. And I'm so aware of that with my own children now, trying to find those moments of simplicity, of bonding, of presence, being there. And that's quite difficult against the cultural kind of dismissive roles that we kind of take on, and this is what I love about what you're doing with the work, and especially since you've said, you're working with the men more and more now, because trying to get to get that into the wider sort of consciousness is so important. And I think, as we've alluded to in this podcast, the change that we're rapidly forming now, people are adapting, and we're becoming a little better at communicating and offering these thoughts to one another. Knowing that you're working with gentlemen as well as women, and are these couples? Are you working with people together?
Sometimes.
So
but
that must be fascinating. Are you seeing this? I'm sort of rambling at this point, but I'm quite. There's a lady I listen to, Esther Perel. Are you aware of Esther Perel? I love Esther Perel's work, and I love listening to her podcast. Where should we begin? Because I feel like I learn so much, because when she has couples in there talking together, and she creates this environment where they can speak, and obviously it's a different scenario to what you're doing, but ultimately it's just about opening up and communicating. So I feel like I learned so much from that. So for when you're working with couples, does it feel, can you feel them learning together? Can you feel them kind of literally connecting, as opposed to sort of when you're working with individuals and they're opening up? Can you feel them sort of learning one another?
Yes, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Yeah. They're understanding what they're bringing to the table, essentially, like what energy they're bringing, and like where they're connected, where they're corded, and how their energies are playing with one another. They're getting a sense of that dance, and to see the other person and to really be seen, of course, is so important.
Yeah, that presence, and it's so hidden in plain sight, isn't it? The gratitude of just the most simple thing.
Yes, and like the details, being so attuned to the details, like feeling every sensation, and learning to play with the masculine and feminine essence. And it doesn't, sometimes it's the woman who can be holding the masculine essence, and the man flips to the feminine essence, and just sort of working with how these energies are so beautiful when they interact with each other. There's a certain skill to it in a way, but it's really just about listening and just feeling, just getting really quiet and feeling the field, as it were.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I love that. That's something like I say, I'm really working on that personally. And these last couple of weeks, I've had a little bit of a wobble and felt the pressure of the outside coming in a little bit. And I'm excited to talk to my wife tonight after this conversation, because she'll be asking me all sorts of questions. And I feel like I've taken so much in this short time that we've spoken. So I must thank you so much for that. It really is elevating to speak and to learn about yourself, through other people's skills and intuition and recognition, So I thank you so much, Carlotta, for that. So before we leave you, again, we thank you for your time. It's been wonderful. Where do people find you, and what does the future hold? And are you is it sort of remote learning? Can people do remote learning with you?
Yes, absolutely. I have this online space called Temple, and that's where men and women can come together, and it's classes and meditations and recordings, and I do live channeling sessions every month where people can ask me questions, and I can do readings for people, essentially to support them see where their energy is at. And then I have a 6-week course for women called Oracle, for women to learn how to use their bodies as an oracle, in that way of being attuned to things that we were talking about. And hopefully I'll be doing a course just for men in the new year, because I'd love to do that too. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we'll link everything into the Modern Medicine Woman. We'll link the book in. And again, thank you so much for your time, Carlotta. It's been so greatly appreciated. And we wish you well in this strangest of strange times.
Thank you so much. It was so lovely to speak to you, Sam.
And you. You take care.
You and to your wife.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Take care.